Every individual that's being investigated for a charge of driving under the influence is a potential defendant. And with that comes the right to remain silent. Even though somebody's been pulled over by a law enforcement officer, even under the suspicion of driving under the influence, it's a difficult decision to make, but there's no obligation to speak to that law enforcement officer. There's no obligation to participate in the field sobriety tests. There's no obligation to give a sample of your breath to the officer so that he can prove all of these elements to you in court. The catch to it is that in Virginia, you will then be charged with something called refusal. And that refusal, as it infers, is your unwillingness to cooperate with the officer during his investigation for driving under the influence. We get there through what's called the implied consent law. Here in Virginia, if you're driving on her highways, you are considered to have implied to consent to this investigation if an officer has determined that you are under suspicion for driving under the influence. The penalties for being convicted of refusal are significant. It is an all-out suspension of your license for 12 months with no possibility of a restricted license. On the plus side, you're not being convicted for driving under the influence and facing the repercussions there. But again, you will not be allowed to have a restricted driver's license if convicted of the refusal. Now, the reason this is a strategic play if you're being investigated for driving under the influence is that if you're not cooperating with the officer, if you're not participating in his investigation, the evidence that he would be able to present to the court about your driving behavior, about your driving under the influence, will be greatly limited. He will be forced to use the driving behavior, the smell or odor of alcohol, the other visual observations he would be able to make in order to convict you of driving under the influence. So in the most serious of circumstances, it is an option for you not to participate in that investigation when being suspected of driving under the influence.